One of the most fundamental philosophical questions is why do we think both morally and politically the way that we do? In other words, do we perceive the world based on a set of inherited traits that have been passed down to us, or are we more influenced by the environment that we find ourselves in from birth? While a leader or great businessman may take full credit for personally accomplishing something, it is very rare to get there without the help of anyone else at all. Today I'm going to be discussing the role of business hegemony in the development of the industrial United States and what role it may have in perpetuating certain values and ideas. I feel qualified to discuss this topic as I am currently enrolled in a Marxist theory class. While many view Marxism as the predicator for Stalinism and other forms of communism, Marx would argue that there has not been a socialist revolution in a country that had a legitimate capitalist system to begin with. I believe there are some very useful concepts within Marxist theory that explain social phenomena that we see take place today. Today I would like to approach the concept of business hegemony from three angles, looking at its history and role in the formation of worker attitudes, public policy, and academic influence, examining how business hegemony may have significant impacts outside of labor relationships, and finally we'll provide an example of a corporation that used many of the hegemonic practices to influence the thinking of its employees. Overall, this is a concept that can be difficult to understand because of its social complexity, but examining its place in society, both past and present, can help us better understand the relationship between private and social interest. So what is hegemony exactly? It is the idea that something or someone dominates our thinking. In many cultures past, the king would have been a very hegemonic figure, as his ideas had substantial influence on those that lived under him at the time. In this way, the idea of business hegemony is that the current capitalist business environment dominates the mode of thinking of the general public, swaying them to be friendlier towards the goals of companies than they are to the goals of societies and the needs of people. I will enter my discussion of the subject in the 1920s. During this time, productivity was increasing at an exponential rate, and the economy was growing faster than ever. Despite this, worker wages remained stagnant as business owners could threaten loss of employment if employees made efforts to organize and lobby for rights. This direct influence on workers by keeping them from forming unions via threat of their job is exactly what business hegemony is. Over time, since workers could not purchase the products they were buying, the Great Depression took full effect. During the Great Depression and the FDR years, unions saw greater and greater protection. As the worker began to come back from the Depression in the post-war years, coalitions of capitalists formed in order to set the course for public thinking for decades to come. The Mont Pelerin Society is a perfect example, where some of the most prominent industrial business owners of the time employed and funded economists to do research that ultimately promoted the idea of market fundamentalism. As a result of this, there was an emphasis on the right to work laws that granted businesses the ability to crack down on unions depending on which state they were in. This is often considered the main culprit for why real wages in the U.S. have remained stagnant in the 1970s, but productivity has gone up exponentially. At the end of the day, it is not hard to see that top-end business owners would have a large interest in maintaining capitalism as an institution. In the 1930s, it was clear that capitalism was failing. One way of persuading the public to continue to accept it was to encourage a certain level of normative acceptance through academic research that produced results that drove home the message that the world is inherently best under a capitalist system. It worked, and economic academia to this day adheres to the ideology that free markets are the most desirable form of system. The most common way to think about business hegemony is to think of it in terms of the owner-worker relationship. Another way to consider the effects of corporate influence on thinking would be to examine the role of business in negative externalities such as the environment. We all contribute to climate change, but free riding and collective action problems mean that we have a hard time addressing the issue. This is amplified by the hegemonic idea that we should ultimately put the needs of private businesses ahead of more abstract issues like global warming. The same means of cultural influence means that businesses dominated with their hegemonic powers can also dominate thinking in other ways, such as shielding the public's view from pertinent research that discusses climate issues to economic research that appears damning if we do not continue to increase production. Fundamentally, business hegemony has the goal of creating the most business-friendly environment possible, without considering the consequences, whether they are the workers, in this case the environment. One question you may have after hearing all of this heady talk about dominant influences on thinking, you are likely wondering, where do these concepts get actualized? One example of distinct hegemonic influence was the General Electric in the post-New Deal era. The top labor and public relations executive of the time, Emil Boulware, was hired as a class-conscious capitalist who saw an ideological offensive by business as necessary to restore capitalist power in the New Deal era. One of many famous quotes from Boulware included, "Unions are the most familiar symbol of the socialist opposition to maximizing the free market." In fact, a term called Boulwareism was developed in his name. Its definition in political science is to deny the union's ability to claim that they have won gains for workers. This will come through a series of take it or leave it offers to unions. This hardline bargaining, combined with a massive PR campaign meant to instill ideologies in their own workers that GE provides them with the best life that they could hope for. Boulware also instructed supervisors to be political thought leaders, distributing reading material that often favored the position of the corporation that they were working for. These class-conscious tactics were not unique to GE and Boulware, but instead were common tools used by large businesses to encourage complacency among workers. Workers were discouraged entirely from bargaining to improve their working lives. This idea that the business of corporation will take care of its employees and that they should not ask questions or look to change conditions is pivotal to the idea of business hegemony. Whether direct or indirect influence through means of overt power influence, employers can take advantage of the position of employees and their reliance on wage incomes to influence their thinking and quell issues of workers realizing their collective power. As you can see, while the idea of business hegemony is not intuitive, it is clear that such a concept has been very prevalent in the progression of our capitalist system. Through history, we can see how business hegemony dominates worker-employer relationships while also having a significant role in the way we think about other social issues, such as negative externality of climate change. Additionally, corporations such as GE have practiced using business hegemony to influence the thinking of both their own workers as well as the general public, best exemplified in the way that they often strong-armed or failed to recognize unions. Overall, this is a concept that can be difficult to understand because of its social complexity, but examining its place in society, both past and present, can help us better understand the relationships between private and social interests.